If he sings one more note, I want him gone." Avery, Sinclair, didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice, low, calm, razor-sharp, cut through the silence of the 49th floor like a scalpel. The kind of voice that made interns freeze mid-step and seasoned executives check their posture. The hallway outside the boardroom was dimly lit, sterile. Empty, except for the faint sound of a man humming. No, not humming, singing. A lullaby, barely audible but it carried. A melody that didn't belong in the glass and steel world of Sinclair Holdings. It floated through the vents, slipped past sealed doors, and landed uninvited at the feet of power. Avery stood still. Not because the tune moved her, but because it annoyed her. You hear that she asked her assistant Renee. Renee hesitated. "It's the janitor, I believe. He usually works late. He sings sometimes when no one's around." Avery turned her expression unreadable. "He's around me. Yes, ma'am." She walked briskly down the corridor, heels echoing like punctuation marks. The melody grew clearer. A man's voice, textured and gentle, almost too gentle for a place like this. It wrapped around the silence like a soft scarf, making the fluorescent lights feel warmer, the late-night air less cold. Avery hated it. She turned a corner and stopped. There he was, Jack Marlowe, late 30s or early 40s. Sleeves rolled up, mop in hand, singing under his breath like the world had stopped to listen. A lullaby, delicate as breath filled with words like darling and light and sleep. He didn't see her at first. He was facing the window, singing to the skyline like it was his only audience. "You know," she said coolly, "some people work better in silence." Jack looked over his shoulder, caught mid-note. He blinked at her. "Even children sleep better to a voice," he replied unbothered. "Luckily, we're not children." She folded her arms. "This is a corporate headquarters, not a nursery." He gave a faint smile. "Could have fooled me with all the tantrums I've seen after hours." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you mocking me?" "No, ma'am, I'm mopping." Silence fell, a long, taut thread between them. Avery stepped forward. "Pack your things. You're done here." His brows lifted, not in shock, but something quieter. Disappointment, maybe. Not in her, just in the world, perhaps, for being so predictable. "Of course," he said simply. "Will I be paid through the week?" She hesitated. "You'll get what's owed." Jack nodded, leaned the mop against the wall, and walked toward the supply closet without another word. Renee, who had trailed behind Avery like a nervous shadow, finally spoke. "He's been here for almost a year. Quiet, punctual. Never caused trouble." Avery's tone was like glass. He just did. As they turned to leave, a quiet voice behind them, one of the night security guards, spoke almost a whisper. "You might want to reconsider, Miss Sinclair. Your daughter. She only started sleeping through the night the last couple months. Ever since his shift changed. Ever since he started singing on this floor." Avery froze mid-step. "What did you say?" The guard, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm just saying. I see things. The cameras, the logs. She used to be up every night screaming sometimes. But lately, quiet. On the nights he works." Avery's lips tightened. "You think his singing cured my daughter's insomnia?" "No, ma'am, but maybe it reached her in a way none of us could." She didn't respond. She just walked away. That night, Avery stood outside her daughter's room for over an hour. She didn't open the door, just listened. Inside, Lila twisted and turned in her bed. She'd refused her usual sound machine. The white noise, once calming now, too fake, she'd said. "Where's the man?" she asked earlier, fists balled at her sides. What man? Avery had replied. The one who sings. No storybook helped. No therapist's suggestions worked tonight. Only silence and the slow build of anxiety. Through the door, Avery heard the soft thud of Lila's stuffed bunny hitting the floor. The whimper that followed cracked something in her. "Mommy," came a muffled voice, fragile. "Where's the voice?" "The voice is gone." Avery leaned her head against the wood. Her hand trembled, hovering near the doorknob. She didn't go in. Instead, she walked back to her office, pulled up Jack Marlowe's employee file, and stared at it. No emergency contact listed. No references. Just a P.O. box in Brooklyn and a phone number that rang into voicemail. She clicked the speaker icon. Listened to the greeting. It was his voice. Even in that sterile recording, it carried the warmth of someone who once knew lullabies not as melodies, but as memories. And for the first time in years, Avery Sinclair felt something stir inside her. Not guilt, not regret, just the faintest echo of a song she couldn't quite remember, but someone once sang it to her. The soft hum of the city crept through the high-rise windows, but in the Sinclair penthouse it wasn't traffic or sirens that filled the air. It was silence. Avery stood in the hallway, one hand clutching the doorframe to Lila's room. Inside, her 6-year-old daughter curled beneath her quilt like a question mark, her small body, rigid, trembling eyes wide open despite the late hour. Her breathing was shallow, staccatoed by little sobs she tried and failed to stifle. It had been 3 nights. 3 long, endless nights since Jack Marlowe's voice vanished from their building. Avery had tried everything: the weighted blanket, the soft lavender spray Lila used to love, even a lullaby playlist curated by child therapists, voiced by gentle professionals with soothing tones. Nothing worked. Lila wasn't just not sleeping, she was breaking. Earlier that evening, Avery had crouched beside the bed, brushing a lock of tangled hair behind her daughter's ear. "You're safe, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm here. Mommy's here." But Lila had only turned her face away, eyes wet, jaw clenched. "No, you're not," she said. "I'm right here, baby." No, Lila's voice cracked. "He's not." Avery froze. Who loved the voice? The man voice. He used to come. In the air. Her tiny hands flailed above her head. "He's gone." Avery's chest tightened. "Do you mean—" "The janitor, Mr. Marlowe." Lila looked at her then. Looked through her. "He sings like my stars." Avery blinked. "Your stars." Lila pointed toward the ceiling, toward the glowing constellation stickers she had insisted they place months ago. "The voice sings in dots. Soft. Real." There was no way to explain to a 6-year-old that the man who sang lullabies while mopping tile floors had been fired for it. Instead, Avery tucked the blanket tighter and whispered, "I'll try to find your stars again." But now at midnight, standing alone in the hallway with the faint sound of her daughter quietly weeping on the other side of the door, Avery felt the cracks in her perfectly managed world beginning to split. She paced into the living room and poured herself a glass of Scotch neat. She didn't usually drink, not anymore. Not since Lila's diagnosis, not since the noise in her life needed to be managed, filtered, sterilized. But tonight, the silence was deafening. She sat on the edge of the sofa and picked up the old music box from the bookshelf. A delicate piece, gold-trimmed white porcelain. It had belonged to her mother. Avery turned the tiny crank. The melody was faint, slightly warped with age. A lullaby, too, one she hadn't thought of in years. She closed her eyes, tried to remember the words. A hum, a name, a feeling. But the notes just slipped through her memory like fog. She wanted to cry and hated herself for it. Back in Lila's room, the cries had shifted into restless murmurs. Avery pushed open the door quietly and stepped inside. Her daughter was sitting up now, back against the headboard, knees tucked to her chest. "I can't sleep again," she said without looking up. Avery knelt beside the bed. "I know. Can you sing?" Avery hesitated. Her voice had always been clinical, meant for boardrooms, not bedrooms. "I don't know what to sing, honey." Lila shrugged. "Then just say it." "Say what?" "The words." Avery looked at her daughter, truly looked. The exhaustion around the eyes, the fear of the unknown, the desperate ache to be soothed. "Just say it," the child had asked, as if even the words without melody could carry weight, so Avery tried. She opened her mouth and whispered the only fragment she could remember from the old song. "Lay down, little light, the night will guard your sleep." Lila blinked eyes wide. "That's it," she said, voice suddenly sharp. "What is—" "That's his song. The voice man." Avery's heart stopped. "Lila, are you sure I heard it in the walls, every night when you worked late?" Avery swallowed hard. "You mean Jack?" Her daughter nodded. He knows the stars. Later that night, Avery found herself back in her office, barefoot, scrolling through building logs and maintenance reports like a woman possessed. Jack Marlowe. No criminal record, no references, no college. But his employment file included one odd detail: he had voluntarily covered night shifts no one wanted. Shift logs showed a consistent pattern. He had started taking the 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. slot around 2 months ago, right around when Lila had started sleeping better. She pulled up old security footage. No sound, but there he was, alone on the 49th floor, mop in hand, cleaning as if in a dream. Occasionally, he would stop, look out the window, close his eyes, move his lips, singing. Avery muted the Scotch commercial playing in her head and dialed the number from his file. Voicemail again. She let it ring. "Jack," she said after the beep. "This is Avery Sinclair. I need to speak with you, not as your employer, as a mother." She paused. "My daughter is asking for you, and I think I might be too." She ended the call and sat in the silence. Not the clean, clinical silence of power, but the aching human kind. The kind that makes you long for a voice in the dark, even if it comes from someone you thought didn't belong. The next morning, Lila fell asleep on the floor beside the couch, wrapped in Avery's old scarf. She had refused to go to school. "The stars are still gone," she said. Avery didn't argue. Instead, she sat beside her daughter and hummed the tune again. Imperfect, hesitant. And for the briefest moment she thought she saw a small smile on Lila's lips as her breath began to slow. It wasn't sleep, but it was peace. For now. The fourth night was worse. Lila refused to eat dinner. She lined up her stuffed animals in a straight, quiet row on the floor, then screamed when one tipped over. Her voice, usually small and airy like feathers, now cracked and splintered like glass. Avery sat on the floor beside her, defeated. "Honey, what do you need?" Lila didn't look up. "I need the quiet man who sings." Avery pressed her palms to her face. Jack Marlowe. She didn't know who he really was. He had no LinkedIn profile, no Facebook, no trail. Just a first and last name common enough to disappear into the crowd, and a voice that somehow lived in her daughter's nervous system like muscle memory. It was time to stop pretending this was coincidence. It was time to find him. By 10 p.m., Avery was in her home office with a mug of black coffee, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot from 4 nights of broken sleep. The room smelled like ink and silence. She had pulled up Jack's original employment application. Sparse, no previous employer, no references, no emergency contact. But there was one thing. A line in pen added after the typed portion, almost like an afterthought. Prior experience, busking Faneuil. Hall, Boston. Years unknown. Avery paused. Faneuil Hall. She clicked open a browser and typed his name alongside the phrase street musician, Boston. Nothing relevant. She tried again. Jack Marlowe, guitar singer, Boston. Then Faneuil Hall street performer, Lullaby. The third link brought her to a grainy video from 12 years ago. A man, maybe late 20s then. Rugged, unshaven. A soft gray beanie pulled low over his brow. He sat on a milk crate near the entrance to Quincy Market. In his lap, a battered acoustic guitar. The video's audio was distorted by wind and traffic, but Avery leaned in anyway. "Lay down, little light the night will guard your sleep." Her breath caught. That melody. Lila's melody. Her melody. She hadn't heard that song since she was a child. Her mother used to hum it while brushing her hair, while tying her shoelaces, while rubbing her back after nightmares. Avery sat frozen, the kind of stillness that only happens when something breaks and something begins. She clicked the user profile that had uploaded the video. @FanuelFan83. No posts in years, but a contact email. She sent a message, "Hi. Do you remember this performer, Jack Marlowe? Do you know what happened to him?" She hit send and waited. The reply came at 1:14 a.m. "Yeah, I do. He disappeared after a hit and run. No one knew his full name. He was in the hospital, then vanished. Rumor was he'd lost someone, or maybe himself, but he could sing like heaven. Avery leaned back, heart pounding. She searched Boston hospital records, hit and run, 2013 Jack Marlowe. Again, nothing official, but she wasn't looking for official anymore. She was looking for ghosts. The next morning, Avery walked into the facilities office at Sinclair Holdings. The building manager, a kind-eyed man named Craig, looked up from his desk with surprise. Ms. Sinclair. She didn't sit. Jack Marlowe. I need every piece of information you have on him. Craig nodded slowly. I'll help where I can, but he paid most things in cash. We didn't do background checks. We were desperate for overnight staff. Last winter he showed up mop in hand and stayed invisible. He ever mentioned family? Craig shook his head, but there was this thing he did. What thing? After his shift around 2 a.m., he'd sit in the atrium. Not long, just 10 minutes. Quiet. Eyes closed, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Avery hesitated. What was he listening to? Craig's eyes softened. That's the thing. He wasn't wearing earbuds. That evening, Avery took Lila to bed early. Her daughter had drawn something, a picture of 3 figures under a swirl of blue stars. One was clearly Avery, one Lila, and in the middle a man with a guitar. Lila pointed. That's him. I heard him in the sky. Avery leaned closer. Did he ever talk to you, sweetheart? Lila thought for a long moment, then shook her head. No, but he sang like he knew me, like he knew what scared me and told it to go away. Avery bit her lip. Would you want to see him again? Lila looked at her mother and whispered, He sings in colors, Mommy, and everything else is just gray. That night, while Lila slept restlessly on the couch near the old music box, Avery made another call. This time to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Her father's old friend, Thomas Greer, retired police detective now working private missing persons cases. He picked up after the 3rd ring. Sinclair, he grunted. Never thought I'd hear your voice again. I need your help, she said. I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to be found. He chuckled. My specialty. Name Jack Marlowe. Pause. Janitor, right? Used to sing. Her heart skipped. You know him? No, but I've heard about him. My buddy does janitorial contracts for city buildings, called him a ghost with a mop. Used to work nights, vanished clean as a whisper. Avery swallowed. Can you find him? Greer's voice shifted serious now. Tell me why. She closed her eyes. Because I fired him, and I think I might have erased something sacred. 2 days later, a text from Greer lit up her phone. Brooklyn. Under the BQE. Sunday school basement. No formal address. He helps kids sing. Avery stared at the screen. He helps kids sing. She whispered it aloud, like a prayer, like a possibility. She glanced at Lila, curled up on the rug, drawing another picture. This time, there was a music note floating above the man in the middle. Her daughter was speaking in drawings now. And Avery. She was finally listening. The church basement didn't look like salvation. It smelled like old linoleum and second-hand coats. The paint on the walls peeled in places, revealing layers of once hopeful colors beneath. A row of folding chairs lined the side. An upright piano sat under a flickering bulb, and near it a circle of kids no older than 10 banged spoons against tin cans, clapping, laughing, not to any particular rhythm, but with joy. In the center of it all stood Jack Marlowe. He wasn't singing, not yet. He crouched beside a small boy, showing him how to use his palm to mute the tin can's ring. His hands moved gently, patiently, like he was helping the world learn to listen again. Avery stood in the doorway watching. She didn't know what she expected, maybe guilt, shame, bitterness, but he looked at peace. No mop, no uniform, just an old flannel shirt and jeans. Sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing calloused hands that had known both hard labor and harmony. She took a step in. The door creaked. He looked up and froze. Their eyes met across the room, and time seemed to slow. The children paused, too, sensing the shift. Jack stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands. Well, he said quietly, if it isn't the voice of upper management. Avery didn't flinch. You used to sing in my halls, she said. Now you teach music in a basement." He nodded. Both jobs involve cleaning up messes. The kids giggled, unsure whether it was allowed. Avery offered a faint smile. "Can we talk?" Jack looked at the kids. "Break time stars. 10 minutes." The children scattered toward the juice cooler. They sat on opposite folding chairs. Between them, the silence was thick, not awkward, but heavy like a song waiting for its next note. "You found me," he said finally. "I didn't know I was looking for you until you were gone." He looked down. "That tends to be the pattern with me." Avery inhaled slowly. "My daughter hasn't slept since your last shift." Jack said nothing. "She asks for you," Avery continued. "Not by name. She calls you the voice man. She says you sing like stars." That made him pause. He smiled, just a flicker. "I didn't know anyone was listening," he said. "She was. She is. And so was I think. I just didn't realize it." Jack looked at her, the edge in his eyes softening. "Why are you really here, Miss Sinclair?" She hesitated. "I came to ask you to come back." He chuckled, low and dry. "Come back and what, mop floors and hum lullabies until someone else decides it's inappropriate again? I'll make it official. I'll clear it with the board." Jack shook his head. "That building wasn't made for music." "No," she admitted. "But maybe my daughter is." The room went quiet. "You fired me," Jack said. "I did? You didn't ask my story." "You're right." He studied her face. "Why now?" Avery's voice broke a little. "Because she's scared, and I don't know how to reach her, but somehow you did, and I'm willing to set my pride aside if it means giving her back even a little peace." Jack leaned back. "It's not pride you're setting aside, Miss Sinclair. It's the illusion of control. That's harder." She looked down at her hands. "She used to wake up screaming. Then one night she didn't, and I never thought to ask why. Now I know. It was your voice, your song." Jack nodded. "It wasn't mine." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, worn, soft at the edges, handwritten music, crude notes, pencil-scrawled lyrics. "Lay down, little light." Avery's breath caught. "That's the one." He held it out. "Someone gave this to me a long time ago. When I was a kid in a hospital bed I wasn't supposed to survive. A woman. She held my hand and sang it. Said it was her mother's lullaby. Said it helped her daughter sleep." Avery felt her skin chill. "My mother," she whispered, "used to sing me that song. I thought she made it up." Jack met her eyes. "Maybe she did, but she gave it to me." A stunned silence fell between them. She looked at the page in his hand. "Where were you, Children's Hospital?" "Boston. Winter of '94. Her voice was thin. "That's the year I broke my arm falling off the backyard swing. We were living in Boston then. She used to volunteer at the pediatric wing, brought hot meals, books. She said it made her feel useful after we lost my baby brother." Jack nodded slowly. "She came every day," he said. "Taught me that song while I healed." Avery swallowed hard. "You kept it." "I did more than that," Jack said quietly. "I sang it into every hallway that forgot what kindness sounded like." They sat in stillness for a long moment. Then Jack folded the paper gently and handed it to her. "I think it was meant for both of you," he said. Avery took it with trembling hands. "Will you come back?" He exhaled. "Only if I can do more than mop. I can arrange that." Jack looked back toward the children. "They call me Mr. Jack Who Sings." "I don't want a title. I just want to be useful." Avery stood. "Then let me be the one to give you a space where your voice is heard on purpose." He smiled, finally full real. "Careful, Ms. Sinclair," he said. "You sound dangerously close to being human." She smirked. "Don't tell the board." As she walked towards the exit, one of the kids tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Who's the fancy lady?" Jack glanced toward the door where Avery paused. "She's the reason I found the song again," he said. The child tilted his head. "Did you forget it?" Jack looked down at the music sheet in her hand. He said, "But I forgot why I sang it." He turned back to the circle of kids, picked up a guitar with a cracked neck, and started strumming softly. As Avery stepped out into the cool Brooklyn dusk, the first chords followed her like a memory rekindled. The apartment was unusually quiet that night. Not the sterile kind of silence Avery had grown used to in corporate boardrooms, but something deeper, like the hush that comes just before a storm of realization. The music sheet Jack had given her lay unfolded on the coffee table, its pencil-scribbled notes as raw and vulnerable as an open scar. Lila was curled up on the sofa blanket around her shoulders, a sketch pad in her lap. She wasn't drawing, she just stared at the ceiling where the glow-in-the-dark stars flickered faintly under the dim lamp. "Mom," she whispered, not looking away. He remembered my song. Avery blinked. "Whose song?" "The one from my dreams," Lila murmured. But it was his voice. Avery sat beside her, hesitating. "Sweetheart, I need you to hear something." She reached for her phone, queued up the old video from Faneuil Hall. The sound was muffled, the guitar weather-worn, but the voice cracked something open in the room. Lila turned her head slowly, listening. Avery watched her daughter's breathing soften. Then she did something she hadn't done since Lila was a baby. She sang. Tentatively quietly, the first few words of the lullaby Jack had carried like a secret prayer for decades. "Lay down, little light." Lila's eyes fluttered closed. Avery kept singing. "The night will guard your sleep." Her voice trembled at first, but something ancient woke up inside her. The cadence, the phrasing, it wasn't just familiar. It was hers. Buried beneath years of deadlines and detachment, her mother's voice had lived there all along, waiting. Tears welled in her eyes as Lila turned into her side and let out a breath, deep, even peaceful. She was asleep. Truly, deeply asleep. And Avery, still holding the final note, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Later, she sat alone at the kitchen table, the music sheet now pressed into a clear plastic sleeve like something sacred. She stared at it, at the handwritten lyrics and broken staves, and tried to remember. Not the song, the moment, the woman. Her mother standing in a dim hospital room singing to a boy who wasn't hers. Avery had only flashes, pink hospital walls, the smell of rubber gloves, her mother's tired but radiant smile. "You can't save the world," Mom she'd once said. Her mother had only smiled. "No, darling," she'd replied. "But I can sing to it while it hurts." The next morning, Avery did something her assistant would have considered scandalous. She canceled all her meetings. She spent the first half of the day reading through her mother's old journals, yellowed with time, tucked away in a trunk under the bed. There were dozens, some filled with sketches, others with clippings and recipes. But one, bound in faded blue leather, was marked "Volunteering, Winter, 1994. She flipped through the pages with increasing urgency. And then she found it. Jack, 10, years old. Admitted after hit and run. No parents listed. Quiet. Sad eyes. Loves music. Hummed when I brought soup. Sang him Little Light one night. He smiled for the first time. Told me it felt like someone finally saw him. Avery pressed her fingers against the ink as if she could touch time itself. That evening, Jack arrived at her penthouse invited for the first time. He stepped inside carefully like he was entering a world that might shatter if he breathed too loud. Lila peeked out from behind the hallway, then slowly approached him with a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "I drew this," she said. Jack crouched. "May I see?" She nodded. It was a drawing of him sitting on the floor of a hallway surrounded by stars made of sound waves. In the center, a tiny figure with curly hair slept peacefully. "That's me," she whispered. He looked up at Avery, speechless. "Lila," she said softly, "this is Mr. Jack. He's the one who used to sing at night." Lila stepped closer, wrapped her arms around his neck. "You made the walls sing," she said. Jack blinked, overcome. "You heard them." She pulled back. Every time. Later, Avery walked Jack to the balcony. The city pulsed below, alive and humming. But up here, it felt distant, like the soundtrack of a different life. "She hasn't slept that deeply in weeks," Avery said. Jack nodded. "It's not the song. It's the remembrance." She looked at him. Of what? He exhaled. that someone somewhere once held you with a sound. Avery went quiet. Then after a moment, "My mother wrote about you." Jack turned. "She kept a journal," Avery said. "She wrote about a boy with sad eyes who smiled when she sang." He stared at her, stunned. "I remember the day she came home with tear-streaked cheeks," Avery continued. "She said she sang her lullaby for someone who needed it more than I did that night." Jack's voice was quiet. "I never forgot it." Avery stepped closer. "Neither did I. I just forgot how to remember." Jack looked out over the skyline. "She healed me," he said. "Now your daughter's healing you." And he broke off. "What?" Avery asked gently. He turned back to her. "I think maybe I'm finally healing myself." They stood in silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full of every note that had ever mattered. That night, Avery framed the music sheet and hung it above the piano in the corner of the living room. Beneath it, she placed her mother's journal open to the page that named Jack. A song, a name, and a moment that now belonged to all 3 generations of them. And for the first time in years, the Sinclair apartment didn't just house executives and responsibility. It sang. The photo slipped from Avery's hand and landed gently on the carpet. She sat frozen. Her breath caught in her throat. It was real. The faded hospital photograph taken almost 3 decades earlier was proof of a connection that defied logic and time. In the image, her mother, young serene, radiant, held a boy no older than 10 wrapped in hospital linens, his eyes hollow but his hands clinging tightly to hers. The corner of the photo bore the hospital's embossed stamp Boston Children's. December 1994. The boy was Jack. She picked up the photograph again, studying her mother's face. It was the same look Avery remembered from childhood, not the CEO wife expression of pristine perfection, but the rare softness that emerged only when she was comforting someone, holding space for someone else's pain. That look had saved lives, had saved his life. And now, it had come full circle. The next morning, Avery placed the photo in a slim envelope and slipped it into her leather handbag. Lila was still asleep, peaceful for the 5th night in a row. Jack's singing had returned, but so had something else, a presence. He wasn't just a man who swept floors and hummed lullabies anymore. He was something more now, something intertwined with her past and maybe her future. They met at a quiet diner in Brooklyn. Jack had chosen it low ceilings, no TVs, just a worn jukebox and the scent of maple syrup clinging to every booth. He was already there when she arrived, sipping from a chipped mug. "You came," he said, sliding the coffee toward her like it was part of some unspoken rhythm they shared now. "I brought something," Avery said. She pulled out the envelope and placed it gently on the table. Jack opened it. The moment he saw the photo, his hand trembled. His thumb traced the edges as if trying to step back into that room through touch alone. "I remember this," he whispered. "I remember her voice. It didn't sound like the others. Most people came in with pity. She came in with peace." Avery nodded. "She told me once that there are some wounds you can't bandage. You just have to sit beside them and sing." Jack's eyes glistened. "She didn't just save my life. She gave me my voice." He looked up at Avery. "And now I know whose voice you carry." Later that day, Avery took Jack back to her office not as a janitor, but as a guest. Renee raised an eyebrow as they entered the executive wing. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, stunned. "New department," Avery replied without pause. "Music therapy." Renee blinked. "Is that official?" "It is now," Jack chuckled. "I think I just got promoted without an interview." Inside Avery's office, she showed him the framed music sheet and the now famous lullaby printed in clear script beneath it. The caption read, "Legacy of Light, Traditional Sinclair Family Variant." "I want to start a program," she said. "Pilot phase, music therapy for children with emotional regulation challenges, especially those on the spectrum. I'll fund it. You'll lead it." Jack stared at her. "You want me to teach kids like Lila to sing?" "No," Avery replied. "I want you to teach them how to be heard. There's a difference." Jack's voice was barely audible. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Avery looked out over the skyline, then back at him. "I spent years building walls," she said. "Turns out all it took was one voice in the hallway to remind me why I built this company in the first place." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not who I thought you were." She smiled softly. "Neither are you." That night, Jack returned to the penthouse not with a mop, but with a guitar. He sat in the corner of Lila's room while she lined up her stuffed animals and told them to be quiet and listen. Then she curled into her mother's lap and whispered, "Mommy, is it okay if he sings it now?" Avery kissed her forehead. "You can always ask for your song." Jack plucked the opening chord and the first note hung in the air like a blessing. "Lay down, little light." Lila exhaled. Her eyes fluttered closed. Avery leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, heart full. She watched as Jack sang not for applause, not for praise, not even for purpose, but for connection. And in that room, beneath those tiny plastic stars, something ancient and broken inside all of them began to weave itself back together. Later, Jack and Avery sat on the rooftop. The city glittered below, alive with voices and lights, but up here there was only the hum of night and the warmth of something slowly, quietly blooming. Avery held the photo in her lap again. "She carried us both," she said. Jack nodded. "And now we carry her." They were quiet for a while, then Jack turned toward her. "You know, I used to think being invisible was safer." Avery met his gaze. "And now I think maybe healing doesn't happen in silence." She leaned back, her voice gentle. "No, but sometimes it starts there." He smiled. "Then let's build something where it doesn't have to end there." And under a sky full of forgotten stars, two people, once strangers divided by time and circumstance, sat side by side. Not to sing to the world, but to listen, because sometimes the most powerful music isn't what's played, it's what's heard. It started quietly, a ripple, not a roar. The first day Jack returned to Sinclair Holdings, no announcements were made, no press releases, just a silent name badge and a temporary ID that read, "Consultant, Special Program." But something shifted. The front desk receptionist, usually robotic, smiled when he passed. The janitorial crew paused their carts in the hallway just to nod at him. Even the elevators seemed slower, like the building itself was listening. Jack stepped onto the 49th floor that evening at 9:03 p.m. His hands weren't carrying a mop this time, just a guitar case and a small Bluetooth speaker. The lights were dim, the kind of soft ambient glow designed to keep night staff awake without harshness. He walked past the boardroom, the echo of past humiliation still faint in the carpet. The place where his voice once cost him a job, and now he was back to use it on purpose. In the common area, a few chairs had been rearranged into a loose circle, waiting, almost reverent. Avery stepped out of her office barefoot, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're early," she said. "You're barefoot," he replied. She smiled. Felt right. He took the tea, nodding toward the chairs. "Are they coming 3 interns? One from finance, a kid from IT who stutters when anxious, and she hesitated, a woman from legal. Her son was diagnosed last week. She asked if she could sit in. Jack looked at her moved. "So it begins." Avery nodded. "One voice at a time." Meanwhile, down in this penthouse, Lila lay on the sofa, a fuzzy blanket wrapped around her like armor. She stared up at the ceiling where the stars glowed faintly, their edges blurred by the city light bleeding in through the tall windows. In the background, Jack's lullaby drifted softly from the speaker system. But it wasn't just Jack's voice tonight. It was hers too. Avery had recorded herself humming along with him, a duet born of courage and remembering. The first time Lila heard it, she whispered, "Mommy sounds like sunlight." And now she listened to it every evening like ritual. Back upstairs, Jack played the first chord. He didn't sing right away. He looked around the circle, met each pair of eyes, and said simply, "Whatever noise you brought with you tonight, leave it here. We're not here to fix it. Just listen to it differently." Then he began. The song wasn't the lullaby. It was something new, a blend of rhythm and restraint, a melody with room for silence between the notes, as if the spaces were just as sacred as the sound. And slowly, those in the room began to breathe differently. Shoulders softened, arms unfolded. The walls, the very same walls that once held back his voice, now absorbed it like thirsty earth after drought. Afterward, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Later that night, Avery walked Jack to the elevator. It was nearly midnight. He pressed the button, then turned to her. "You know, when I used to sing here alone, I thought it was for me." She looked at him, and now he smiled. "Now I think maybe it was for her, Lila, for whoever needed it." The elevator chimed. Avery stepped in beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving this place back its soul." Jack met her eyes, and for a brief moment the air between them was charged not romantic, not yet, but deeply human. The kind of closeness that can only exist between two people who have seen each other at their quietest. He said, "I didn't give it back. You just remembered where it was." 2 days later, a small but extraordinary thing happened. An internal memo went out from Avery's office, subject new program, Healing Through Harmony. Starting next month, Sinclair Holdings will launch a pilot music initiative for employees and families affected by developmental or emotional challenges. Sessions will be led by Jack Marlowe in partnership with pediatric therapists and volunteer staff. Participation is voluntary but encouraged. The company, Cold, Clinical Profit First, Sinclair Holdings, was beginning to sing. That evening, Avery returned home to find Lila sitting on the floor with a stack of crayons. On a blank canvas board she had drawn the outline of their apartment. But the walls were not straight lines, they were swirls of color, sound waves, stars. Avery crouched beside her. "What's this one?" "Honey." Lila didn't answer. She simply pointed. Each wall in the drawing had a name written inside the color. Jack's voice. "Mommy's song Stars." Avery felt her throat tighten. "You made the walls sing, sweetheart," she whispered. Lila looked up. They sing back now. Later that night, Avery stood alone in her kitchen, the music sheet still framed beside the wine rack. She traced a finger over the title, Legacy of Light. And, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was managing a life. She felt like she was living one. The next week, something unexpected happened. A journalist from the New York Observer called. They'd heard whispers of a CEO launching a musical therapy program inside a Fortune 500 company. "We've never seen anything like it," the journalist said. "Would you be open to an interview?" Avery glanced at the photo of her mother and Jack from the hospital. Then, at her own reflection, tired yes, but glowing in a way that came not from power, but purpose. She smiled softly. "Yes," she said, "but I won't do it alone." That Friday, Jack stood in the 49th floor common space with Lila beside him. Her hand was in his. She wore headphones, not to block the world out, but to let his voice in. He tuned his guitar and looked up at the small audience gathered employees, children, parents, and somewhere in the back, Avery with tears she didn't bother to hide. He strummed once, then said gently, "Tonight we remember that not all voices need to shout to be heard. Some heal simply by staying." He began to play, and the walls, they sang. The moment the headline broke, it spread through Sinclair Holdings like wildfire. CEO hires. Former janitor, as music therapist without board approval, New York Observer, Business and Culture section. Avery stood in her office phone vibrating relentlessly on her desk while her inbox bloomed with red exclamation marks and the legal department's subject line screamed, "Urgent." She knew it would come. She just didn't expect it to come so fast. Across the room, Jack sat in one of the low chairs, guitar case resting at his feet. Fingers interlaced in his lap like he was waiting to be sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. "I didn't know the interview would publish today," Avery said, keeping her voice level. Jack shook his head. "You didn't do anything wrong." She looked at him. "That won't matter to them." By 3:00 p.m., the boardroom was full. 12 chairs, 12 suits. Avery sat at the head spine. Straight expression, unreadable. Jack was not invited to this meeting, not officially, but his name, his past, his presence lingered in every word spoken, Ms. Sinclair, one board member began his tone sharp but rehearsed. You approved a high-visibility program, using a former janitor with no clinical certification, no degree, and no verifiable professional history. Avery didn't flinch. I approved a pilot initiative using a proven method to address employee and family wellness. Mr. Marlowe's voice has had measurable impact on my daughter's condition. And your daughter is not a case study, another board member snapped. This is a corporation, not a charity. Avery's gaze hardened. Maybe that's the problem. A murmur spread across the table. Another member leaned forward. What happens if one of these children regresses? Has an episode during one of these sessions? We're open to liability. He doesn't have a record, someone else chimed in, scrolling on their tablet. But that's not the same as being qualified. Avery folded her hands. You want qualifications? He's kept this company clean for a year. He's shown up every night when no one noticed. And he's the only person who's ever been able to help my daughter sleep without medication. I'd call that qualified to be heard. The room grew tense. Then a woman from HR spoke quietly but clearly. My son's on the spectrum, she said. We tried every kind of therapy for 2 years. He hasn't made eye contact with anyone outside the family since he was 3. She looked around the room. Last week, during Mr. Marlowe's session, he looked up, at me, at him, and said, "The music feels like a hug." Silence. Dead center. Someone coughed. Then the chair of the board sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. This isn't about his heart. No one's questioning that. It's about protocol. You bypassed the vetting process, the legal department, and internal review. You gave a non-employee a public-facing platform without clearance. Avery stared at him. I gave a human being permission to help. He leaned back, tone sharp. Then help yourself, Ms. Sinclair, because we're voting on your authority to continue this program. If the motion passes, you'll be required to terminate it immediately, and Mr. Marlowe's contract, if it can even be called that, will be voided. Avery didn't blink. And if it doesn't pass, you'll have to formalize your justification. With legal, with HR, with PR, and with full transparency. I'll do it. The chair raised an eyebrow. Even if it means taking responsibility for the fallout. She paused, then nodded. Especially then. That night, Avery found Jack sitting outside the building on the back loading dock where he used to take breaks between mopping floors. She sat beside him, silence settling between them like an old coat. They want to end the program, she said. Jack didn't look surprised. Figures. They said I made a decision based on emotion, not policy. He let out a soft laugh. Maybe you did. She glanced sideways. Does that make it wrong? He shook his head. No, just rare. They sat a while longer. Then Jack turned to her, eyes serious. If it comes down to choosing between me and your job, Avery, don't choose me. She stared at him. That's not your call. It's not fair for me to cost you everything you've built. You didn't cost me anything, she replied. You reminded me why I built it. He looked down at his hands. They don't trust me. No, she said. They don't see you. Jack nodded. That's how invisibility works. She reached out, placed her hand over his. Not anymore. The next morning, before the board reconvened, Avery sent out a company-wide email. Subject: Why I hired a janitor to lead a music program. When I fired Jack Marlowe, I thought I was protecting the professionalism of our company. I had no idea I was stripping away something sacred not just from my daughter, who hadn't slept in years, but from myself. Jack was never just a janitor. He was a voice in the darkness, a reminder that healing doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes it wears old boots and carries a guitar. If my decision to bring him back costs me position, reputation, or comfort, so be it. But I refuse to silence the one thing in this building that's finally teaching us all how to listen. Avery Sinclair, CEO. By noon, the email had gone viral inside the company. Dozens of replies flooded in: parents, employees, interns, janitors, some sharing stories, others just writing 2 words. Thank you. The board vote came and went. It was close. 6 to 5. But it stayed. The program stayed. Jack stayed, and something in the company shifted again, not a seismic change, but a quiet unraveling of old stiffness, an unbuttoning of the top collar of corporate culture, a softening. That night, Avery stood outside Lila's room and listened as Jack played. The door was cracked open. Lila was asleep, one hand resting on her chest, her breathing deep and steady. Avery leaned against the wall, eyes closed, heart full. And inside the room, beneath the song, Jack whispered something only the stars could hear. "You're safe now, little light. You brought us all back." The phone rang just after noon, slicing through the calm of Avery's office like a discordant chord. It was the school, not the principal, the nurse. Lila had suffered a meltdown in the middle of class. Her teacher said it started over a pair of scissors. But by the time it escalated, the child-sized chairs had been overturned, and Lila was curled under the craft table, sobbing into her elbows, fists clenched to her ears. "She's asking for a man," the nurse said gently over the line. "Someone named Jack." Avery's pulse faltered. "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, Avery stood in the sterile hallway of a school that smelled of crayons and disinfectant, watching her daughter rock back and forth on the vinyl mattress in the nurse's office. Lila's eyes were red and distant, her fingers trembling. "She won't speak to anyone," the nurse whispered. Avery knelt beside the cot. "Lila, honey, I'm here. It's okay." Lila shook her head without lifting it. "It's not okay. The sounds hurt today." Avery touched her hand. "Tell me what you need." Lila didn't move, then, barely above a whisper, him. The rooftop was never meant for moments like this. Concrete and steel safety rails bolted down a door that locked automatically after 10 p.m., but it was quiet. Far above the chaos of honking horns and flashing crosswalks, the city softened. The buildings didn't shout. The wind didn't jolt. It breathed. Jack sat cross-legged on the rooftop floor, guitar resting in his lap, facing the skyline. Avery sat beside him. Between them, Lila leaned into his shoulder like a child seeking shelter from a storm only she could hear. She hadn't spoken since leaving the school, just clung. Jack didn't ask questions, didn't push. He tuned the guitar slowly, string by string, each note a stepping stone toward stillness. Then he played. Not the lullaby, not words, just sound. A sequence of gentle tones, minor. Then major shifting, like seasons brushing against the heart rather than the ears. It wasn't music meant to be applauded. It was music meant to be understood. And in the middle of it, Lila exhaled. The first full breath in hours. Her fingers relaxed, her shoulders dropped, and when the final note faded into the wind, she looked up at Jack and whispered, "That one had green in it." Jack smiled. "Yeah," she nodded, "like the color when you open your eyes underwater." Avery choked back a laugh. Sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Jack turned to Lila. "Would you like to help me write a new one?" Lila blinked. "With crayons, with sounds." Lila nodded solemnly. They stayed on that rooftop for over an hour. Avery watched them sketch songs out loud, Lila describing colors and Jack translating them into chords. Sometimes she would name a color pale pink like bubblegum on the sidewalk, and Jack would play a soft D chord with a slow hammer on. Sometimes she'd say nothing at all and he'd play anyway. And when the sun began to lower itself behind the skyline, Lila leaned into her mother's arms and whispered, "Can he stay?" Avery kissed her hair. "He's already here." That night, the penthouse was lit only by the soft shimmer of fairy lights. Jack stood in the corner, Lila curled beside him on a plush armchair, and Avery sat on the floor with a sketch pad in her lap. "I've never seen her regulate like that," Avery said. "Not without medication, not without a script." Jack tuned a string. "It's not me." She looked up. "You're being modest." He smiled faintly. "No, it's not modesty. It's remembrance. Your daughter doesn't respond to me. She responds to what I represent." Avery blinked. "What do you mean I'm not the magic?" he said. "The music is, and the music is memory. It's how her brain learns what safety sounds like, what stillness feels like. He strummed a chord soft and warm. She's teaching me Avery, not the other way around. She studied him for a moment. Then, you said once my mother gave you this lullaby when you were a boy. He nodded. She gave me more than that. She gave me permission to matter. Avery's voice broke slightly. You gave my daughter the same thing. Jack turned toward her, and you gave it back to me. Later that night, long after Lila had fallen asleep with a colored pencil still in her hand, Avery walked Jack to the door. He paused before stepping into the hall. She's going to have hard days, he said quietly. You know that. I do. And you're going to feel helpless. I already have. He nodded. Then just remember when the words don't work, let her speak in colors. Avery swallowed the lump in her throat. I'll try. Jack hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, handwritten sheet music, but incomplete. This is something I've never finished, he said. I wrote it years ago. Started it after the accident. Never found the ending. She took the paper gently. Why not? He met her eyes. Because I didn't know how to write a song that healed me. Until now. Avery looked down at the page, then back up at the man who had once been invisible in the very halls she ruled. You don't need to finish it alone, she said, and he smiled, not politely, not out of gratitude, but like someone who'd just remembered the sound of his own name in a crowded room. That night, while the city buzzed below and the stars blinked uncertainly above, Jack stood on the rooftop once more. This time he played with purpose, and though no one heard him from the streets, she did. Downstairs in her sleep, Lila stirred, smiled, and whispered green. The city was dressed in silver and shadow the night of the gala. The Sinclair Holdings reopening night wasn't just a company tradition, it was a spectacle. Suits and gowns shimmered under chandeliers. Laughter floated through the air like champagne bubbles. Everything glowed with precision. But Avery Sinclair stood at the edge of the ballroom staring at the grand piano on stage like it was a confession booth. The board had tried to keep things predictable this year. They wanted Avery to deliver the keynote, to remind stakeholders that everything was back on track. But Avery had submitted a different request, a performance, one that didn't include a speech, one that couldn't be measured by quarterly earnings. Backstage, Jack sat on a stool, gently tuning the strings of a baby grand. His reflection in the glossy black surface looked steady, until Avery walked in. He looked up almost sheepishly. You sure about this? She took a slow breath. No. Jack smiled. Good. She walked to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. You ever play in front of people who wear watches more expensive than your childhood home I used to sing on street corners? The only thing more judgmental than billionaires is pigeons. She laughed softly, then turned serious. I'm not here to impress them tonight. Jack tilted his head. Then why are you here? She met his gaze. Because I forgot my mother's song. He studied her face. And tonight, I want to remember it out loud. When they stepped onto the stage together, the crowd shifted. Confused. Curious. Some whispered. Isn't that the janitor? Is she seriously going to sing? Avery sat at the piano. Her dress was simple, her hair pinned back. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a daughter trying to find a memory in the dark. Jack stood beside her with his guitar. He leaned into the mic first. I'd like to start tonight with a song that didn't come from a label or a record deal, he said, voice steady. It came from a woman who used to carry soup and songs into hospital rooms. The crowd stilled. She gave me a lullaby when I didn't think I'd live long enough to need one. Her daughter forgot it for a while. I did too. But tonight... He looked at Avery. We remember. He strummed the first chord. Avery placed her fingers on the keys. They began. The melody was simple, familiar. It drifted through the room like a breeze through an old house, stirring things buried in the corners of the heart. Lay down, little light. Avery's voice entered soft but clear, not polished, not perfect. Real. The night will guard your sleep. Jack's harmony joined hers, their voices meeting like two hands that hadn't touched in years, but still remembered how to hold. The room fell into a hush so deep it felt holy. No one moved. Not when Avery's voice cracked on the third verse. Not when Jack caught it and lifted her with his. Not when the final chord hung in the air trembling. They ended together. No applause requested, none needed. Just breath. Somewhere near the back of the room, Renee wiped her cheek. At a table near the stage, a hard-nosed board member closed his eyes, hands clasped tightly. And at the center table, Lila sat in a navy blue dress with sparkles that looked like constellations. Her hands were folded, her eyes wide. She didn't blink, not once. When the music ended, she stood up slowly and clapped. Once, then again, and again. The room followed. Not like a standing ovation, like a prayer, like gratitude too big for words. Backstage after the show, Avery sat beside Jack on a storage crate, dress hem tucked under her knees, heels kicked off. "You saved me out there," she said, voice raspy. He smiled. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you where the melody was hiding." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think my mother's love lived in her voice." Jack leaned forward. "And now I think it lived in who she sang to." He nodded. "Love isn't measured by volume." She smiled. "It's measured by return." He turned toward her. "Then what do you call this?" She held up the old wrinkled sheet music, now annotated, expanded their two hands, having scribbled chords and transitions in different ink. "I call this home," she said. That night, long after the ballroom emptied, after the catering staff had packed up, after the spotlight dimmed and heels clicked out onto the cold Manhattan sidewalk, Avery, Jack, and Lila sat on the living room floor of the penthouse. A single lamp glowed beside the piano. Lila, in her pajamas, held a crayon in one hand and a recorder in the other. She blew one gentle note. Jack mimicked it on his guitar. Avery smiled and played it back on the keys. Lila beamed. "See?" she whispered. "We're in tune." Outside, New York roared. But inside the Sinclair home, three broken songs had found each other, and together they had become a symphony. 3 months later, the 12th floor conference room, once reserved for quarterly earnings calls and shareholder strategy reviews, looked very different. The glossy board table had been replaced by a large circular rug. Floor cushions surrounded it in warm hues, indigo, forest green, deep burgundy. On one end sat a vintage upright piano. On the other, a small bookshelf lined with children's storybooks, sensory tools, and rhythm sticks. A plaque had just been mounted outside the room, the Legacy Room, dedicated to healing through music, memory, and voice. Jack stood in the doorway that morning, guitar on his back, coffee in hand, watching a small group of children file in, some with shy smiles, some hiding behind their parents. One little boy wore headphones and clutched a stuffed dinosaur like a life preserver. He smiled softly. "Same stage," he whispered to himself. "Different song." Meanwhile, Avery sat in her office overlooking the city, signing off on the final documents to formalize the Quiet Voices Initiative, a non-profit arm of Sinclair Holdings fully funded by her own private trust. Its mission was simple: to bring music and therapeutic storytelling into classrooms, hospitals, and homes for children with autism, anxiety disorders, and emotional trauma. She'd signed a lot of things in her career, but nothing had ever felt this personal. She reached into her drawer and pulled out her mother's old journal, the faded blue one with the page about the boy who smiled when she sang. She flipped to that page and below her mother's handwriting added her own. "He grew up to return the song, Avery." That evening, the Sinclair rooftop, once a sterile executive helipad, was transformed. String lights looped above a modest garden. Folding chairs were arranged in semicircles. In the center, a low wooden platform with a single microphone, a stool, and Jack's guitar resting against it. The company had decided to host its first-ever community supper and song night. No suits, no press, just stories, just music, just connection. Avery arrived in jeans and a linen blouse, hair down, carrying a picnic basket. Lila ran beside her barefoot and free, clutching a paper lantern she had painted herself. On it, she had written in crayon, "Songs are how stars talk to each other." As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Jack took the stage. He tuned his guitar slowly, then looked at the small crowd before him, employees, children, friends, strangers who had once passed him in hallways without a glance. 3 years ago, he began I was sweeping floors in a building that didn't know my name. Laughter, but gentle. Then a little girl who couldn't sleep heard a song I thought no one could hear. He glanced toward Lila, who grinned and gave a small wave. Jack smiled. And today, because of her and her mother, this company no longer waits until someone breaks to listen. He paused, then added, I was once told that the right voice in the right silence can hold the whole world together for just one more breath. Then he began to play. The song was new, built on the lullaby but deeper now. Layered with verses Avery had written and Lila had colored into chords with her crayons and voice notes. Jack's voice carried warmth, age, and a hint of wonder, like he couldn't quite believe this version of the world existed. Halfway through, Avery joined him on stage. She didn't sing. She read. A letter to the crowd, but also not. To the mothers who forget their own songs while trying to keep their children safe. To the men who whisper lullabies to empty rooms hoping someone somewhere is listening. To the children who see sound in color and color in music and music in memory. This is for you. This is for us. Let the quiet sing. The crowd fell into stillness, the kind that wasn't absence but presence. After the music ended, Lila stood holding a lantern, waiting for the signal. Jack nodded. She released it into the sky. Dozens of others followed lanterns painted by children, parents, employees. They floated upward, casting soft glows across the rooftop and into the dark like messages for the stars. One lantern bore Jack's handwriting. You sang me back. Another, Avery's. She sleeps now. A third, Lila's green, sounds like love. As the lanterns disappeared into the night, Avery stood beside Jack, their shoulders nearly touching. He looked over and said quietly, Did you ever think this is where we'd end up? Avery shook her head. I didn't even know this was possible. Jack chuckled. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up with a guitar and waits for you to sing back. She looked at him. You never asked for recognition, she said. He met her eyes. I didn't need it. I just wanted to be heard. Avery nodded, tears forming. You were. You are. And now, so are they. As the final lantern blinked out above the city, Avery reached for his hand. Not out of romance, out of reverence. And Jack. He held on. That night in the penthouse, Lila fell asleep without the music box, without the headphones. Just silence. But it wasn't the kind that kept her up anymore. It was the kind that held her. On the wall beside her bed, Avery had framed the sheet music. Below the title in simple, unadorned print, Legacy of Light, composed by those who stayed to sing. And so the quiet healed not only the girl, but the world that had forgotten how to listen. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes everything. It's the quiet one, the one that stays, the one that listens. Maybe love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it shows up as a lullaby in the hallway, or a voice that remembers the song you forgot, but now we want to hear your voice. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments. Your city, your story, your quiet song. We read every single one. And trust me, they stay with us. If this story touched your heart, inspired a memory, or simply helped you breathe a little easier, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to find you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself inside them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And until next time, don't forget your voice matters, even in the quiet.